pleased to be here. You guys have come here to find out more about how to scale your smart cities startup internationally. Okay, to do that, you need to have a good idea, probably a product. Most of you have products here? Yeah, I hope so. It's pretty hard to scale otherwise. You need to have some customers, probably here in the UK. And then you're looking at finding customers overseas. You may need something else. What do you think it is? Money. You might have got some grants already, government grants. You may have tapped your friends and family. You might be racking up credit card debt. Maybe you've got some investment from an angel investor. Well, I've got a panel of venture capital investors. So these are the people who come in once you've raised a little bit of money and you're really looking to scale. You've got a business model that's got some proof. And I'd like to introduce you to the three of them. There's Roy Williamson, and he's from DIT, the Department of International Trade here in the UK. And Roy is part of the venture capital unit. We've got Ben Luckett, who is the managing director at Aviva Ventures. And we have Rob Genieser, who is managing partner at ETF Partners, a venture capital firm here in London. And we're going to be discussing all kinds of things, venture capital and smart cities. So what I'd really like to do first, could you guys introduce yourselves to the audience?
Sure. I'm Rob Genieser. I'm the managing partner of ETF Partners. We invest in great technology companies that can have big environmental impact. So that's what we're all about. We believe in sustainability and sustainability through innovation. So we try to find some great entrepreneurs that are building businesses in smart cities, smart industries, those are three areas. And just as I was sitting in the audience for the last panel, I was thinking to myself, we actually are good at this. I was thinking about, we have a half a dozen investments here in the UK in the smart city sector. And I quickly did the math. Those half a dozen companies are doing more than 75 million pounds of revenue today. They were startups at one time. I wouldn't say they were all sitting in this room, but they were startups at one time. And they're each growing, or I should say the group is growing by over 40% a year. So if anybody wonders whether you can have success doing something in this space, whether it's a real space, yep, you can.
Ben?
Thanks. So my name's Ben Luckett. I'm the Managing Director of Aviva Ventures, as Ben mentioned. So Aviva, the global insurance company, we decided last year to deploy some of our capital into early stage investments. When I say early stage, around sort of Series A is our sweet spot, around £1 to £5 million investment. And as a strategic investor, so a corporate venture capitalist, we look to make investments in businesses that we think have an alignment to the future of the insurance market. And for a lot of people, insurance is quite dull. However, we certainly see that there are some significant technologies that are developing now that will change that going forward. So we're particularly interested in the connected world, hence the smart city link. So we look to make investments across the connected car, the connected home, and connected health. And the reason being is that we believe going forward that the connected world will shift the insurance paradigm quite significantly. The most obvious example is the car, where we move towards autonomous and crashless vehicles. And for an insurance company, that really asks the question around what our proposition is in that space. So we started investing at the end of last year. We've made an investment in a business that's actually building a parking platform. So that's a company called Appy Parking. And from the outside, they look like a consumer proposition, but actually the heart of their play is a B2B play around the data that is necessary in order to effectively help automate a smart city. So they are investing in hyper-local data and have spent the last couple of years working with local authorities and some of the boroughs in London and 11 other cities, to develop a parking solution and a data set that's going to underpin some of that revolution around autonomous cars.
Roy?
Thank you. So I'm Rob Williamson from Department for International Trade. I'm from a part that was UKTI. Good to see colleagues in the room as well. We're about 2,500 people spread all over the globe on behalf of UK companies to access new markets and get the lay of the land locally and how to do business. My team's quite small, deliberately so. We introduce international investors to UK companies. So we do a little bit of testing the water with UK companies, check that they're up to scrutiny, and then we work with about 200 VCs around the world, predominantly corporate VCs, to make those introductions.
Super, thanks. Okay, I'm going to start with a question. You know, I'm not sure about smart cities, guys. Isn't it just another buzzword? You know, there's IoT, there's digital health, predictive analytics. You know, isn't smart city just another way of rebranding these as a way to get more investment? Or is there something there? Or is there something there?
I think it's more fun just to agree and move on, but I think there is a lot of hype. There's a lot of smoke, but of course, under the smoke, there's always a bit of fire. And you just have to fly, as I did last week, back from Rotterdam to City Airport. And as I was coming through, you know, that passport line, there was no line because the gates shockingly worked. Okay, but the fact that we have smart gates that allow you to go through from the security point of view, that's pretty wild, right? Nobody thought of that 15, 20 years ago. I thought it would deploy as well as it has been. Then you go and get on you take your Oyster card out and you walk up and just tap and go, right? Again, 15, 20 years ago, people didn't think that was going to be possible that quickly. And then you get on that DLR train, okay? There's no driver on that train. There is no driver on that train. Everybody says, you know, people are going to get in an autonomous car. You get in an autonomous train. Every day you come back from City Airport, right? Which is pretty wild if you think about it. So people say it's the smart city coming. Well, it's already here. That's the point. And I think the real question is what problems the people in this room are trying to solve. How quickly can they get those solutions deployed, and who's going to pay for them? It's very simple.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's under every buzzword, there are obviously things happening. I was in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, and there's a sort of smart city in action. 158 sensors for part of the water system. The transport has been managed in some districts through sensors and cameras for many years. So this kind of stuff is happening. And if you think about, I think the number is, you know, by 2030 there'll be 41 megacities or something like that. A megacity being a population of over 10 million, and so you know there's actually in a lot of these cities a burning platform in terms of efficiency, in terms of health, in terms of people actually moving around that the smart city technology is enabling. So absolutely think there's some significance underneath that, and as Rob said, I think the trick from a smart city perspective at least is finding the right collaborations and partnerships. I think it's very tough to do stuff on your own, and certainly places like Singapore, and you can argue whether this is right or wrong, but the government are very much taking a lead in that space and working out how things need to be in the future when the population grows to the level. Someone told me that one of their ambitions is to know within 4 seconds if someone's having a heart attack in an elevator. I mean, that stuff is it's kind of mind-blowing. But underneath that, there's a sort of societal question and an environmental question and an efficiency question. And technology has a massive part to play in managing some of these cities that without that sort of smart element may well become unmanageable.
Okay. Roy, you know, the investors that you are in contact with, you know, what are their views on smart cities?
So I think I don't know any smart city company, but smart cities just gives a really nice grounding to give an idea of the context of the conversation with a company.
Right.
You can tell what their market's going to be. So some investors are very clearly into cybersecurity or IoT or other aspects of that. Some are quite general and say they're interested in smart cities. But it's purely because they understand the challenges of a mass concentration of people that's getting bigger and bigger.
Right.
So they're interested in smart cities, but quite often with the investors, you've got to cut it down to what it means to them. Some of them are into software, some are into digital health. So what does a smart city really mean to them? Because it's an initial umbrella, but then you've got to cut it down into what it really means.
Okay. Great. Okay, so there's clearly an opportunity there with smart city type companies, startups, SMEs. So what makes a smart city startup a smart investment? So, you know, what are you looking for? When is a startup in this space ready to come to a venture capital investor for financing? What are you guys looking for? What are the key attributes?
I think obviously it depends where you sit in the food chain, right? So we are a fund that will invest in companies that already have revenue, so they have some degree of traction, they have some degree of commercial success. So where we are on the risk-reward quotient is we're making sure that somebody's buying it. If somebody's buying it, that means you're solving somebody's problem. Again, stay away from businesses that have a lot of subsidies driving that revenue. But again, if somebody's paying good money for your solution, that's good hint to us that it's working someplace in the world. Now, of course, there are earlier investors that will go earlier than that. They will be your, angel investors, seed investors, family office investors. But again, because of people that give me money, which are insurance companies and the like, they expect me to take a certain amount of risk relative to the reward we're chasing. So I have to define what universe I'm going to be going after. So again, I think for us, I'm always looking for, again, some success in some market. Can I take this idea global? Can this be a big idea? Do the people that I'm talking to understand the capital requirements? Do they have some understanding of how much money it's going to take to build out this company? And then the final bit is, do I like the people? Do I think they have the ability to go and create something big? And if they need help, will they accept help, either from us, their partners on the journey, or other people that you help bring into the management? So that's what I think they're looking for.
Great.
Yeah, echo that, and let's maybe start where you finished. That team dynamic is incredibly important. I think it's very easy to have an idea. It's more difficult to get traction, but it's actually really difficult to execute at scale and deliver where there are so many companies in so many spaces at the moment. I don't know, you'll probably know the statistic of how many new businesses started up in the UK last year, but we seem to be hitting a peak of new businesses, new startups. So there's a lot of noise out there. So the team absolutely has to stand out. Interestingly, we see a lot of businesses for whom at least some of the team have good previous experience in a commercially significant environment, and by that I mean we're actually seeing an increasing number of businesses that have startup members who have been part of corporates before, and I find that quite interesting, because actually when you're trying to scale a business from an enterprise perspective, and you're ending up doing deals with bigger businesses, you need to talk the same language. And what one success factor is being able to actually have the right conversation with a potential partner, be it a corporate, be it a local authority, etc. So team's important. We take slightly more risk because we invest at a slightly earlier stage, but we can do pre-revenue, but to that point we're still looking for traction, and also a realistic understanding of where you fit in the ecosystem and particularly what problem you are trying to solve. I think we struggle with businesses that come with a technology but without the right use cases that are proven. So I think we certainly look for that problem that can be solved and that can be replicated in other markets. So we operate in about 16 countries around the world, and I think if we can see from a scaling perspective that this is something that we can translate it into other territories, then that's a good starting point.
I think resonating that as well. I mean, the main three factors are always the traction, the team, and the technology. Usually in that order, because at the level of when you're up for a larger scale investment, that's what really matters. But with that, I think if you're looking at traction, it's also to know whether it's not about whether the technology works, it's whether the business works, and that's the difference a lot of in terms of maturity of companies. Because at a very early stage, you're often trying to find a hook from a customer that then pulls it and says, "That's great, this is how I can use it." But there's a requirement for a proof point really for the larger scale investments, early rounds, that says someone's interpreted this, someone's made use of it, and that's the market we're going for.
Great, thanks for that. I think there's a common denominator, a common theme that's coming out of those three responses. What's that? Traction, right? Investors want to see that you've got sales, or you've got customers that are interested. One of the number one criteria, sets of criteria to look at. Now, you guys are selling to cities. You're trying to help cities. And as we heard earlier today, that can be a challenge, selling into a local authority, local governments. Yikes. For me and other investors, that can be a little bit scary. So with all the headaches attached, it's a hair-pulling experience selling into governments. So investors, tell us, is that a deal breaker? Selling into local authorities? Are there ways that startups can navigate that business model challenge? In your experience, have you seen it?
I'm pausing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of different companies go to local authorities and they present their solutions, and the local authority doesn't always know what to do with it. I thought the last panel was excellent, because what came out of that panel was know what that local authority wants before you walk through the door. And I think that was an incredibly important comment, because we get so many people in our offices say, obviously the local authority is going to buy it because we can do X, Y, or Z for them. And they're not really set up for X, Y, and Z. They have a very specific solution that they're looking for, very specific problem they're looking to solve. In this country, the UK leads in smart street lighting. Okay? There is no, I think, larger deployment around the world than in the UK, because people decided they wanted it. That's what the local authorities want. So obviously, if you make smart street lighting today, it's probably a pretty good market, probably a pretty receptive crowd, right? And so I think you have to really identify what those folks want before you come in pitching your idea. And if they're not the right audience, then you got to go find somebody else to sell your company, or that company to, your product to. Because there's all sorts of different ways to build a smart city company. I think most people forget. You can, for example, one of our companies makes the monitoring for trains. Okay, go talk to train companies. Somebody else does the monitoring devices around Coca-Cola fridges. Go talk to Coca-Cola, right? Smart authority, smart local councils are smart, they buy product, but there are lots of other types of customers out there for the smart city product. And I think that's what we also have to reflect on.
Yeah. Go on.
No, I agree with that. I think the patience is important in those conversations, but there's also a potential to find other routes to have the conversation. So local authorities partner with a vast amount of different suppliers, and it tends to take time to build up that trust. So think about if you can have conversations with some of those partners first, to get the insight, and B, potentially pitch ideas together from a collaboration perspective. I think that's one thing. The other thing I'd say is, be absolutely clear of the relevance to your solution, and where it's taking away pain points, then I think that's quite helpful. And there's no better way to sort of prove out what you're doing from a sort of demo or a free bit of work to begin with, just to sort of capture the attention. So and interestingly, when you get in, there are many opportunities, especially around data, and especially around digitizing data that exists in local authority archives in pretty archaic formats from what I understand. So I talked about the company we've invested here, who spent a long time sort of taking the pain out of local authorities' data by digitizing it and putting it on a platform where it did exist just on CDs. There's another company I met who've been working in the US with local authorities, and they are literally, or the equivalent, literally only digitizing the data that local authority owns, but making it usable, making it actionable, and making it, I guess the word is functional, being able to, taking it into a way that it can be interrogated, searched, and visualized. And actually that's kind of breakthrough, because local authorities, don't have massive resources, don't spend a lot of time, in R&D. So if you can sort of focus on those pain points and actually demonstrate what your solution is, rather than just sort of pitching a presentation. And I think that's a good route in, and also partnering with people who already have good relationships.
I think building on that as well, I mean, it's something that came across from the earlier panels is the carrot and stick approach. You know, if you're able to save someone money, it's worth knowing who's going to save that money, because if you're a council and you've got a 15-year contract with a waste company, you probably want the council to make the introduction to the waste company. But then there's the, sorry, on the stick side. On the carrot side, you know, these are intelligent buyers, and you really want them to spec. You've got the best technology out there. So there's an education piece to realise that you don't want faster horses. There's a new art of the possible. So with you know, if you look at the cascade of the flow of money, it's coming from a higher authority, a smart city authority. So they need to be aware of what you're capable of and what your technology or solution is capable of, to then spec it to their prime contracts. There's obviously a risk profile in all of this as well. I mean, there's a risk profile in working with the early stage technologies. I mean, that's why you might deploy something in Boston before you do it, before New York says, yeah, okay, it's proven enough for us to take it on.
Right.
So that's the other aspect of this as well, and understand what those risks might be and how to mitigate them before you go in and have that conversation.
Right.
I think there might be another sort of issue behind what you're asking, which is, you know, I grew up in New York City, and there was a jingle at the time was, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, right? I.e., if you can sell to your hometown supporters, you can start building your business, then we'll go global, okay? And that makes a lot of sense, especially when you're small and you're limited resources. I mean, it's not that easy to fund a 2-3-person development team in Singapore this week if you're just bootstrapped, right? So I think for a lot of businesses, you have to kind of prove it out in the market that you're in. Now, clearly, if you're doing a chip that's going to go on the latest handset, probably you have to have some international development, and probably going to have to build relationships to Asia, right? But for a lot of businesses, you have to make sure you can prove it here, I think, before you go to global aspirations. So I was a little bit surprised, maybe they're more mature companies, that earlier panel today, when they asked, where does all your revenue come from? 80, 90, 95% overseas. That's not so typical, I would say, for your average smart city company that's coming out of the blocks.
Anything else? Okay. Yeah. No, I was really surprised too, because normally, you know, companies build their businesses where they're located. You know, close connections with customers nearby, partners nearby, investors nearby. In most cases, venture capital investors, they don't want to have to travel too far. So this is really interesting. So it's an exception, but great nonetheless. It shows that, you know, markets are global. Customers are willing to look at, you know, vendors from far away and implement their solutions. So great news. But you guys, many of you have got international businesses, but when, you know, in other cases, when do you guys think a business is ready to go global? You know, is it, they have to have those proof points in their home market, but it's not easy to get into international markets. What kind of evidence do you want to see that they can do it? Part of that scaling is internationalization. Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, a lot of the time we get the early stage customers through, and a lot of the time that's through the missions and things that the Department of International Trade does. So that's a good proof point that someone out there, you've already made that bridge into international markets. If it's without that bridge, but it's still an aspiration, then you certainly conquered your home market. I mean, that's the one you've been able to spend time and effort actually nurturing the relationships, deploying, doing testing. So if that's a good foundation, then maybe you are ready for that leap overseas. And failing all that, the third option could be to have a strategic partner that can take it globally or be in that new market. And if that's no go, then it's really, you know, say the blind. It's an aspiration, but then they're going to land in a foreign territory and say, right, what do we do?
Yeah, great. Well, just so you guys know, this is something that EIT Digital can help scale up stage businesses. Companies they're ready to scale, or scaling into new markets. We have offices across Europe. We have business developers on the ground in Germany, in Scandinavia, in Spain, Eastern Europe. And what we do is we leverage that network of business developers and finance people, and we can help you grow your businesses in those European markets. So if you're interested in finding out more, come and see me afterwards. smart cities, often it's it's often about software. Software is great. It's highly scalable solution for growing quickly. But often with smart cities, it can be coupled with hardware. You need sensors to observe the behavior of people in the city. You need, there's autonomous cars. That's serious hardware. For venture capital investors, that again, this can be kind of a scary prospect. Hardware means capital. It means inventory. It means possibly requiring all kinds of people in the field to install the hardware. All these kinds of risk elements are into play. Now, what I really like to hear from the investors is, is hardware something that turns you off? Is it repellent, or is it something you're willing to embrace and think about and and support?
It's easy to rule out an asset class.
Yeah.
It's easy to say I don't do hardware. A lot of people say that today. Of course, the last deal I did was a hardware deal. So not in trouble. No, we invested in a drone company. They have some very specific patents that are protecting the drone so that when it flies in a confined space like this, it doesn't crash. And it's a perfect tool if you're trying to do inspections of ships or whatever or what have you. And it's really cool. And guess what? Sales are going like this. And so these guys are pretty smart folks. They're EPFL, Harvard folks. They're able to sit there and move the business model as the company grows. Okay? So I'd be very surprised if it was a hardware company in 3 years' time or 4 years' time. I think they will find a solution sale, which means it's more than just the drone that they sell today. And again, this is back to if you're solving a real problem, you've got a head start. I don't really think it matters too much if it's hardware or software, but you better be prepared to shift your business model and grow. Yes, working capital is a big issue. Yes, banks don't fund startups. Yes, it's a pain for me because I have to throw equity at stuff, and that's very dilutive, very expensive, and not good. Okay? So yeah, there are some business models that are still very difficult to support, and we probably won't do them.
The great thing to remember though with hardware is you put money in, and a very top level view is that money is getting sunk into the company. It's not really building the value. It's not being used by people who go out and build sales. It's actually going in a physical object. The flip side of that is it's a physical object. That's difficult to supplant. If you are selling a piece of hardware that's got a lifetime and that can generate value, and you've got that capital lock-in that you can then build on. If you're software based, you might get supplanted by a new solution quite quickly. And if you're software based, it's quite often it's about how much customer traction, first mover advantage, capture the market. If you're hardware and someone buys into it, you've got that, and it's locked in. But the difficulty is maybe not being a hardware company, but like you say, it's where you stack up in the value chain. Because some hardware companies, they flip from being, I've got this hardware, to I can tell you what's going on in that equipment. And the way I do that is this put a bit of hardware. But you're not interested in how I do it, you're interested in what I can tell you that you didn't know.
Ben, any thoughts on hardware? Do
No,
you invest in hardware?
I have. And echo what's been said. I think, if there's significant IP in what's being developed, that's interesting. Absolutely. I think you just have to be clear on what kind of company you are, and actually if there's a hardware component that's necessary that's not necessary for you to build yourselves, then don't do it. Outsource that, bring it in, and it depends your starting point. We looked at a droid company, interestingly, which were looking to solve the sort of last mile delivery problem, which will exist in cities going forward. And in some ways their solution had they had no choice to begin with but to build the hardware themselves, the prototype, because the combination of what they were trying to do didn't exist. But hold that quite loosely as you develop, and it's a tough market in terms of when you start competing with others and you're still in hardware and you cannot effectively control the costs, then that that can kill you in terms of your bill of materials being unnecessarily high or not economic. Then it's a really challenging space to be. So think very carefully. But I don't think from a strategic investment perspective, we don't rule it out. Because actually it's particularly in the connected home at the moment, there's a lot about software, but also about devices that might change. But it's at this stage, it's a good learning to be part of that sort of device ecosystem.
Okay. I mean, is it worth, for the companies out there that, where hardware is a component of their solution, are there innovative ways to handle this? I mean, should they be looking at partners who supply the hardware, possibly even equity partners, or vendor financing? Have you any thoughts on that?
Again, I think one of the challenges, if you're a pure software company, it's not easy to walk into somebody's office and sell them software because it just started out, right? People put software in a box, and people are happier buying boxes sometimes. It's kind of silly, but it's true, right? When you walk into a local authority office and you say, I've got this to sell you versus I've got some PowerPoint and it can do this. I think I'd rather have a thing sometimes, right? I mean, there's something to that. Now, it's probably not a good idea to buy the thing, right? If you can find a partner that makes the thing in Asia, that you put your software on top of, right? And I think for those early days when you're building a business, you have to scramble to figure out what solution the customer wants and what package it's going to come in, right? So I'm not really biased towards hardware, software, or whatever. I think it's all about the solution at the end of the day.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Roy?
Well, the great thing with software is it's fairly cheap to deploy.
Yeah.
So you can actually, if I show you a PowerPoint with the box, you're really not motivated. But if I can hook up and say, look, this is what I can do with, I've absorbed some of your data. Some great startups actually say, just give us your data, do it anonymize whatever you want. We'll turn it around, we'll show you the value. And that's where a lot of it comes from, actually demonstrating the value in what you do.
Great. Okay, I'm going to put you three guys on the spot. You can pick from companies you've invested in, companies you haven't invested in that you wished you had. Tell me some of the favorite companies, smart city companies out there that you think are going to grow and be really successful.
Well, I mean, obviously you choose from your own portfolio. But
you don't have to. It can be somebody you missed.
No, but I think what I would talk about is something that nobody thinks about.
Okay.
So we have in our portfolio company called E-Leather, which sits in Peterborough. And what they do is they take waste leather, you're able to build it back up again, and you have a leather substitute. But since it started as a leather fiber, it ends up as leather at the end of the day. But when you build it back up, you can actually make a lighter, better, more environmentally friendly product. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go sit on JetBlue or Delta or whatever. All their seats are now made out of E-Leather. Okay? It's one of the fastest growing UK companies out there. Because they did something very clever, right? They said, let's take a waste material, back to the comment about waste earlier, and let's do something useful with that. And we're going to have a better product through this process. And that's what they've been able to achieve. So, interestingly, you could call it a hardware product because they make something, right? There are no bits flying around. These guys have to sell something on a roll, okay? And it's an amazing achievement that those folks have been able to do. So I get very excited when you see people doing something unique that's having success, that is in effect becoming the global leader for what they're doing, because nobody else does this today. That's wild to be part of that journey. And that's what I think is cool.
Ben?
Yeah, I'll go back to the one I referenced at the beginning, Appy Parking, because it's really interesting business. It started with an entrepreneur having to solve a problem. He was at I think it was the Royal Albert Hall, and he couldn't believe the complexity of the parking requirements and the fact that he wanted to park here and the notice was like 3 blocks down. But what in trying to solve that problem, the business has pivoted quite significantly into recognizing the two things really, the power of data in the smart city revolution. Sounds obvious, but it's significantly important. Secondly, that local authority thing has come through because they've spent time and more time building relationships, getting into those local authorities and solving a problem. But the most exciting bit about that is they are now doing deals with and in conversations with some of the big OEMs, people like Ford, for example, which actually, from very humble beginnings of quite a sort of a narrow idea, has transformed into supplying, from a B2B perspective, data into significant players in the automotive industry in a reasonably short space of time, and they're now looking to scale significantly. And I think that was a very exciting journey to be part of.
Great. Roy, companies you come across, companies your investor contacts are sniffing around at?
Quite a lot, but then I'm scouting the UK 24/7. So
Okay.
And I guess it comes back to the challenge of how do you define smart city.
Okay.
There's prowl that there's plug-in AI systems that can be used in vehicles, but could be used in fintech and a whole bunch of other things, but also controlling the city. There's quite a lot in automotive, Oxbotica and 5AI and companies like that. Obviously, companies like Talensa, they're doing very clever things in terms of deploying infrastructure. And then there's companies like 8Power, which, if you look at 8Power, they're an IoT company. But then smart city requires OT. There's a really interesting Venn diagram, and that's just a really cheap sensor that'll detect stress and strain and things like that, and transmit it, but very, very low power. So you can actually have very clever technology everywhere, not just sensors everywhere.
Right.
And then Fusion Proc, which is detecting vehicles and understanding what the vehicle's doing. It's where do you stop? This comes back to the problem of smart city. You need to narrow down. If you're saying you're a smart city company, I say that's great. Which bit?
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, this is a very rare opportunity for you guys. You've got two venture capital investors here, and Roy, who has got access to hundreds of venture capital investors. So please, let's get some questions. Yes?
There's a bit of a conflict within our company at the moment. We will be seeking a Series A fairly shortly. We're receiving conflicting advice. On one hand, we're getting people advising us saying, just wait, hang on a few more months until you're break-even point, and that'll put you in a lot stronger position. We've definitely seen a cooling in the market, getting that strong position. And we've received other advice that has said, the moment you make profit, it's never big enough. Do it before you make profit and seek a Series A there. What would your advice be?
For me, it's easy. I'm guessing the size of the company you are. So it's all about growth. I could care less whether you're profitable. There's two other comments I'll give you. Next quarter, you'll always be better. Okay. When you're thinking about your timing.
Yeah.
And then the last one is nobody ever went bankrupt because of dilution.
Okay.
Maybe they went bankrupt because of delusion.
Dilution.
Yeah.
Dilution. That's a whole different panel.
Yes.
It's really a question directed at Ben. Aviva Investors is a lead player in describing sustainable investment.
Yep.
Meeting with the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive and, in particular, supporting climate bonds. From what I have found, local authorities know nothing whatsoever about this as a source of finance to invest in these kinds of companies. Are you playing, or can you play, a role to engage with local authority finance directors?
That's a great question, because the meeting after this, we're discussing that very subject, actually. So the simple answer is yes, and I think that's something that we are actively looking at. Aviva Investors, for people who don't know, is so Aviva as a company has a life insurance business, a health insurance business, general insurance, and our investment arm has about roughly sort of 300 billion under management. So an institutional investor, predominantly. So I sit within the group. So I work with the Aviva Investor guys, but obviously my remit is very different from a scale perspective. But we are increasingly working together to share learnings and have those conversations. So, yeah.
Because there's the funding seeking.
Absolutely.
Local authorities.
Yeah, and I think that local authority landscape is changing and is having to as a response to a number of factors. And we were talking earlier about sort of that sort of matchmaking service, and I think there's more we can do in that space.
Because local authorities say they haven't got the money to invest in these companies. Give them start-up platforms.
Yeah.
Take that on or off. I never know. But look, when 5 years ago I was at an event similar to this, and a startup raised their hand, they said to me, you know, we don't need guys like you because the Green Investment Bank is going to fund us. There's a difference between the risks I think the people here are running and the people here are willing to run, which I imagine aren't as big as the people there, but I just want to say that loud and clear. You guys take a lot more risk than we do. But then you get to those institutions, they're a lot less risk sensitive.
But not to put money into local authorities. They're practically risk-free. They can't go bust by law.
You know, I try to persuade them that what we do is lower risk. Okay? Risk is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to some of these institutions.
Okay. But the scale of the money that's trying to get into
I heard your earlier questions. I don't disagree with you.
Right?
But I think you'd be surprised at how hard it is for some of these institutions to go in the direction you'd like them to go.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, even for large technology companies, it's hard for them to convince their board to create a venture capital arm because they think it's too risky. So, you know, it's not incomparable from a local authority or the government. Now, a couple more questions. This gentleman over here.
Hi. So it's been really interesting hearing you guys talk about the hardware and the software and the value that it brings and the solution that it brings. One of the things that's an interest for me in terms of scale and scaling startups is the cultural aspects that they have in place. And I'm very interested to hear from both your perspectives when you look at your investments, how much you look at, of course, the solution, but also how much you look at what are the cultural aspects and that dynamic, what importance you give to that, and how you see that growing in importance.
Yeah, this is a good question. And you know, there are investments that we haven't done because of that that subject in terms of an alignment of values. So the simple answer is very important, but for us even more so, because as a large organisation, one of our challenges is how we move at pace. Back to the previous conversation, and it's you know, with 34,000 employees, that's a challenge at the best of times. So we take a view on culture in terms of a value matching view, but also what we can learn. And so we don't sit there as an investor and say either we've got all the answers or that you know, it's a one-way conversation. We think we can bring what we call smart capital in the parlance of today, because we have distribution, we have customers, we have brand, but culturally, I think, without being naive, we like to think that we can learn a lot from our investments in the terms of how they approach problems, how they move at pace, what agility really looks like, pivoting, etc., etc. So for us, one of my key metrics of success is how some of that culture transfer happens. So we look to second people from our organisation into our investments so they can actually understand what it's like to work in that environment. We bring founders in to speak to a number of teams just to talk through how they approach stuff. So we see it as very much a sort of a two-way process and a critical part of our assessment. As I said, there are investments that I've stopped because that cultural alignment isn't there. And I won't go into detail now, but there are some businesses that we've assessed where people's attitude, particularly to how they use the funds that they raise, just doesn't fit with where we are as an organisation. One of our values is what we call kill complexity, because we are a 320-year-old organisation and massively complex. Part of killing complexity for us is learning from startups, and particularly how they approach working at pace. So a very important aspect.
The key word is partnership, right? We go in as minority investors, not as majority investors, so we better be aligned with the entrepreneur. And if we don't share that vision from day one, we're going to have big problems going forward. So it's very important to know what you want out of it and what you're trying to do with it. I think you also asked a very interesting question, and I think a great startup CEO brings people around him or her from different backgrounds, different experiences, and you better be ready for that. Because if they all look and think like you, the chance of success probably isn't so great.
Okay. There's a lady at the back who had a question.
Yeah. So my question is use of funds. I find it interesting as a question when I'm in front of a venture capital firm to be asked to present my business case and then to define what I'm going to use afterwards the funds for. Obviously to deliver my business plan. So, and that can evolve depending on the success of the traction in the market. Your use of funds is going to change considerably. So if in our case, we're a scale up, we're looking to expand globally, and when we're looking for funding, which we're currently doing, we're looking for that ability to support that business plan. And the thought that I have to define specifically, and also the quantity of money, which is quite an interesting question. Each fund seems to have a different amount of money that is in their sweet spot. So can you sort of address how you marry that with the business plans that you have in front of you? Because I can make my business plan something that I need 10 million for, something that I need 50 million for, something that I need 2 million for. Right? I can flex it any which way, and I do that depending on what I know about the people that I'm presenting the money to. So what are you expecting to see from us when we're sitting in front of you?
I wasn't creative with these guys because they're proper VCs. The only thing I've seen around use of funds is to actually, if you imagine getting to know a company, your companies they're not always as openly truthful as the idea might be. Sometimes something's a plan and it's not quite concrete. So if you can see a use of funds that says they're doing a lot in R&D, then you think, okay, there's a pipeline coming through, this company's got extra, it's no longer funding. If it's opening a sales office, then there's going to be a good reason to do that. If it's to get through the next trial, then all of a sudden there's a spike in my risk register that says, okay, there's something that needs to be proven before they really go to market. There's a lot of money going to be plowed in, and it could just be written off. But I'll leave it to these guys.
I don't want to sound like, what's the right word? They're different. Well, we know each other, so I know. But I think the honest answer to the question is ultimately, right, we're almost like customers up here. And you have to shape your message for the customer. Not every customer is the same, right? And so, look, if you go see Axel, they're going to want to put 10, 20 million in you. So walk in and say, I need 2 to 3 million, it's not going to make a case, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. There's nothing you can do about that. If you come see me, say you need 20 million, I'm going to say, no way, right? Yeah. It's too much money. Yeah. So you have to know the individual that's sitting across from the table, you have to shape the message, okay? But I also, back to the comment I was making 2 seconds ago, we're in partnership. And if you come with something that's crazy, and 2 days later we're in a different, world, that's recipe for disaster anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to be in the realm of, if you would, acceptability and reality.
Yeah. If I can just add, raising money is a little bit like riding a bike. You want to be in the right gear. If you're a little company and you're growing fast, 20 million is like going into 20th gear from first gear, and the gears might just grind to a. You might grind you to a halt, and you can't pedal anymore. On the other hand, 1 million may not be enough, and it may just get you spinning too fast, and you don't go anywhere very quickly either. So it's really important that you get the right amount of funding that you're able to cope with, that you have the resources to handle, and that your cap table is going to allow. So there's requires some thought and planning.
I really like that. It's about the gear, but also what the hill is.
Yeah.
If I'm not 20 million and I'm suddenly going like this because I've got so much customer traction, then that's going to
Yeah.
He's got an electric bike there, so
Yeah. You had a question, sir.
Yeah, about team. What does your ideal team look like? Is it about, can you define it, can you describe it? You also talked about, the kind of corporate, having a corporate experience and previous experience. How does that fit with people who've not done it before?
Yeah, so I like people. I actually base a lot of my decisions on the people. I think I'm a pretty good judge of people, and I still get it wrong. Okay, so what do I do about that? Well, lately we've been using some third-party folks that are actually pretty good at assessing teams to come in and say, that person, they don't cut it. Make the investment, you got to do X, Y, Z, right? Do a head of sales or something like that. Hopefully it's not the CEO founder. And maybe it is the CEO founder, right? And then you say, well, wait a second. Okay, you got the company here, you're great at X, Y, Z, but if you're going to go get to the next level, you got to go get, I don't know, the former head of EMEA for Cisco to be running your business, right? That's the kind of conversation I think that you have to have with people, even before investing sometimes. Because if you try to have it, spring it on somebody later, that's not going to work. But I really do think that the assessment of people and teams is where a lot of us go wrong. Because it's actually pretty easy to read patents.
I think the clue was in the question in terms of teams. So we tend to look for co-founders rather than a single founder, because I think it's important to get that balance early on. I often like to see the sort of the counterbalance between members of the team. So if you've got a visionary, a guy, girl who's passionate, who's really going for it, from an ideas perspective and what they want to do with the business, often you also look for someone who's able to implement those ideas. And sometimes they're the same person, but in my experience, often they're two different people. Look, it's not a science. As you say, you can't read something, assess it. I think there needs to be a clear division of roles within that team. I think we've seen teams that everyone's a co-founder, and actually they have to find their right role, and sometimes that does mean switching people around. And I've met many businesses where the founder has come to a point where they recognise that they're not the CEO going forward. They're a specialist, and that's where they fit. I think my point around experience is, I think if you are trying to sell, and in this discussion to things like local authorities or to corporates, some experience of having those enterprise conversations is helpful. It's not essential, but as I said, it's often about talking a slightly different language. I think we look for I think diversity is important in terms of backgrounds, and it's interesting how many people we meet that kind of look the same in terms of where they've you know, not because of who they are, but how they think they have to behave. So we look for, you know, that diversity across the piece as well. So I think, you know, the balance, clear roles and responsibilities, and a recognition that team may need to change over time. And I think one challenge that we have often is, if it's a very technical team, that balance with the commerciality is important. So bringing in at the right time the person who can actually make those sales, close them down, and help grow the company.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Bud.
I'm just thinking about it in terms of, you know, it's a really big subject. We say it's about the dynamics of the team. It's, you know, if it's heavily technology led, then are they going to be really in a sweet spot for an acquisition? If not, then where's the people who are going to deliver it to market? And it's trying to find those people. If you're from the other side of the table, you're trying to knock it down. And I've seen companies where they've pivoted, they've got something really interesting, and they need to get it into a particular sector, and say, that's great, okay, how do you get into that sector? You know, and they've got nobody in that team who knows anything about it, no partners, nobody involved, and all of a sudden it's a great big step. Whereas if there's someone in the team who's done a startup before and just has that experience and has that credibility, then all of a sudden their business starts to become lower. And I think that's a big part of it. It's just look at it as a risk and say, would you do this? You know, the guy's done it before. How much more do you need to know? He's had so many successful exits, and he's in the same space with another one. He wouldn't be backing something that he didn't believe in. And simply, you know, a CEO, if they start talking about the technology rather than the business, then, you know, it marries up with what stage the company might be. If it's quite early stage and they're talking technology, that's great. But if they're later stage talking technology, then you think, well, that's nice, but how do you make money out of this? What's your vision for the company? You know, how are you going to hold the team together?
Yeah, you know, you want to have as a rich a team as you possibly can. With that being said, you guys are startups, scale-up stage. You may not have all the ingredients you need, and in some cases, it's raising the money is going to allow you to get the right people into the team. So keep that in mind. You can approach an investor and say, look, we have a 75% team, but we really need a key international salesperson, and we'd like to use some of the funding to get that person. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Question on VCs. What are your time horizons? And related to that, what is your failure rate? And compensate for that, what's your expected return rate, if you like?
Well, we all raise 10-year funds. That's the normal length of time. We invest over a 4 or 5 year period in companies, and so we obviously want to see success over that 10 years, the total 10 years. If you're not going into a global recession, right, most people expect to see exits somewhere in a 3 to 5 year period. Once you hit a global recession, good luck. And so, you know, it all depends how quickly you can grow these businesses, I think, is to the point in time you get to a point where you choose to exit these businesses. What's interesting is most people think the VCs are dictating when entrepreneurs exit. I remind you, most of you still own a significant part of this business, and most of you will decide when you want to exit. And if you decide you're leaving, i.e. selling the business or going public or doing something, it's kind of hard for me to tell you not to. So, interestingly, people think we're dictating to the startups when they're exiting. I think we have, you know, we help them with that, but they're definitely part of that journey. Back to returns, you know, most people look for 30% IRRs, 20-30% IRRs over the course of a fund that's considered to be a good fund. You know, you hope to do 3 times or above at the fund level. That's considered to be great success. Obviously, a lot of people don't achieve that success. And so, you know, that's the kind of math that you're working at when you're an institutional fund. If you're doing angel investing, right, you know, obviously your one hit better be really good because you're going to have lots of failures. So, again, the rate of failure is also dependent on, you know, the stage in which you're investing. I hope to have 0 failures. But by the way, that's another problem with Europe. Europe people will hang on to companies for a long time because they don't want to admit failure. In the U.S., on to the next ship thing. That's kind of brutal.
Failures,
Hmm?
You didn't have any failures.
No, of course you didn't. I'm joking around. Never be so bold.
else from the audience? No? Okay. Well, I guess we can.
I just have one more question.
Yes.
Oftentimes there are disputes, the way the promoters and the investors depend on a particular issue or something going on in the company, right? The way you think would be different. So how do you resolve these? Because I had a problem with my earlier organization, so I had to actually quit the process.
Yeah.
So how do you guys do it?
So again, I'll leave you, hopefully I learned a lot along the way. One of my great mentors, he had another piece of advice to me. He said, you can always fire a manager. You can never fire a shareholder. Right? And what I think he was getting at of that is once you let people into your capital structure, you better be darn sure you really want to have those people in. I think we had a conversation out in the hallway about bootstrapping versus taking venture money to begin with. So you better be darn sure that you're on the same page from the beginning. If you start to fall out with people, right, that is a problem. Okay? And I don't want you to think that there's some magic solution to that. But this is why you should know your investors, and we should know our entrepreneurs well at the beginning. Back to the team building question about who we're doing business with, because we hope not to be in that situation. Wish I had a crystal ball. By the way, we don't have failures. We have exits and zero valuations.
Great. Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. I want to thank the panel. Thank you guys for taking the time to come out and share your wisdom and experience. Judging by the looks of everybody's faces, I think everybody's really pleased and they've learned a lot. So thank you again. Take your hand.